Good evening, good evening, good evening, my people. Good evening, good evening. I hope you and your families are doing well. So, to those of you watching live and to those of you who will be watching later, I want to just thank you again for tuning in to AEA Films YouTube channel. As you know, our focus is telling African stories to the mainstream. So, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We have a playlist of documentaries shot across Africa, from Voodoo in Togo, the Dahomey Kingdom. We have Mali. We have most recent one is the 4-part documentary series Kemet: A Journey Through the Black Land, where I explore the Egyptian leg of the Nile River as I travel through Cairo, all the way down to Abu Simbel and back up north to Alexandria. So please support. And of course, we're discussing the African origin of Egyptian culture. So as we say where I come from, Nono, which is Igbo language, which means you're welcome. Welcome to this live, where tonight we'll be picking up from where we last finished on Saturday night. So far, we've discussed how Nigeria was formed 1860 to 1960. We've discussed the reasons for the January coup in 1966. And tonight, our final discussion on the topic will be to pick up from where we left off, describe the crisis during the summer of 1966, the subsequent coup of July 1966, and up until the declaration of the Republic of Biafra on the 6th of July 1967. So before I begin, let me take a sip of water. It's been a long day. It's like 10 p.m., 10:30 nearly. Before I actually begin, let me discuss the thumbnail, which is on the title, okay, and the use of the word genocide. I would really, really like to stress that I'm not trying to be provocative here. I'm not even trying to sow seeds of division at all. Okay, I'm not here for that. You guys know me. The term genocide of the Igbos is not something that I made up. Okay, it was used as a title in a report made during this period. So, anyway, as always, excuse me. As always, I want to remain open-minded. People live on TikTok, I'm here, by the way, YouTube channel. Yeah, so I want to remain open-minded. So again, please don't take my word for anything. Do your own research. Education is the passport to our future. And we will continue to be ignorant people if we do not educate ourselves on the things which directly affect us. Okay? So without further ado, once again, people on TikTok, the topic is... So rather, the subject is going to be on YouTube. Give me a 1 if you can hear me, people. If there's anybody there. Kwame Olatunji, long time, my brother. Galactic Soul, namaste, namaste. Good to see you, people. Okay, so that's the topic. This is the PE. Hopefully, this won't be as long as the last two, simply because I need to get to bed. I've had a very long day. Also, for those of you who don't know, we're going to be live again tomorrow. As you know, it's Nigerian Independence Day today. So, we're going to be talking about the state of the nation, but I want to just finish discussing what we've been discussing before we move on to other business, okay? So let's go. So Nigeria, let me take this other bit off. Where are we? How's everybody doing this evening? I bet you people are surprised to see me 3 days in a row nearly. No. It's 3 days ago, sorry. Okay, where are we? How do I take this thing off? 1 second, guys. Okay, here we go. Okay, so Nigeria's genocide of the Igbos. Again, these are some useful books. Where am I? Can you guys see me? Yeah. Again, these are some useful books. Some of these books I referenced in the last session. So Why We Struck, Nzorgu. Nzorgu is going to be very, very useful if you want to understand this part of the topic. Nigeria's Five Majors mostly talks about the January coup and then what happened to the coup plotters. So if you're interested in that, the fall of Biafra, okay, probably jumps ahead of what we're discussing today. Ironsi, Nigeria, the Army, Power and Politics, probably the best book to read on this particular subject. My Command by Obasanjo. Really, I guess kind of overlaps this and the war, and then his later 2 presidencies. Tragedy of Victory. Emeka. Emeka's a very important book. Very, very short read. Oh my God, I keep saying I'm going to bring it, but I never... Where is it? Anyway, it's around. But Emeka is a very, very short read, written by Frederick Forsyth, who's the guy who wrote the book, The Day of the Jackal, which is the famous movie, which was made into a movie about the attempted assassination of Charles de Gaulle. Really, really good movie. In fact, I made a movie called Mona a few years ago, actually like 10 years ago nearly, which is kind of like a different version, like an African version of the film. Anyway, let's get started. Thank you for joining in. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so actually, no, let me do this. Let me show you what the screen looks like first. Okay, so we're going to do a quick recap of what we discussed last week. So the first recap of the First Republic. So as you can see, you have the region there, the entire Nigeria on the left-hand side, and then you have an image there. So let me just go through and try and explain to you what's going on exactly. So first things first, people. So if you remember, 15th of January, 66, they struck. So Major Ademoyega, Major Ifajuna, Major Nzogu, and others. They succeeded in killing the Prime Minister, I suppose they call him Sir Balewa. He was knighted, I think. Sir Balewa, the Premier of the North, Ahmadu Bello, Samuel Akintola, who was Western Premier, Festus Okotie-Eboh, who was the Finance Minister, Unegbe, the Army Quartermaster General, Brigadier General Maimalari, Brigadier Maimalari, and Brigadier Ademolegun. I don't know why I find out how to say this guy's name. Ademolegun is the one who, he was murdered with his wife in bed. Horrible story. And then the daughter, I mentioned in the last session that she's written a book about it. Those last two, Maimalari and Ademolegun, commanded battalions. Okay, so in all, something like 22 high-profile soldiers and civilians were killed on that day, and so it was dubbed an Igbo coup. The truth is, it wasn't, which we discussed last week, and this was evident in the fact that the coup itself was foiled in Kano by an Igbo person, or Igbo-speaking person, in the form of Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, who eventually became leader of Biafra, but we'll get to that. And in Lagos, it was foiled by another Igbo major general by the name of Agui Ironsi, who was the GOC general officer commanding of the Nigerian army at the time. He rounded up the coup plotters and jailed them. And we talked about it last session. He had support from a Cameroonian and another Igbo colonel who assisted him in getting the troops to Ibadan and so on. Let's also remember something, guys, that the main aim of the coup plotters was to liberate Obafemi Awolowo and place him as the head of state. And ultimately, the coup was a disaster in both the way it was executed and in creating even more division in the country. And the first problem was when Agui Ironsi himself was made president of the federation. Okay, so let's move forward. All right. We've got a good turnout today, guys. All right, so let's just see. This is another recap. This is just to see the key people involved in that second coup. So on the bottom right, you have General Agui Ironsi. Top left, you have Ifajuna. On the top right, you have Nzogu, and you have Ademoyega, bottom left. So those are the three coup plotters. And on the bottom right is Agui Ironsi, who eventually became head of state and foiled the coup. So let's look at just what actually happened. In fact, there's no need to do that, actually. Let's move on. What do we? Yeah, let's move on. Let me not waste your time. You guys remember what happened. So Ironsi as head of state, okay? So Ironsi became head of state after the coup was foiled. So now, look, immediately after the coup, there was chaos and confusion. Now, Ironsi coming from the army was not like subsequent military rulers of Nigeria, in that he didn't create the chaos. He didn't create the coup itself to take power. He was merely reacting. Okay, he was reacting to a leaderless country, and politics is a vacuum. So the few key elected officials that were left alive, the man said, look, it's best that we just suspend the constitution and keep things moving in a way where we, the army, can maintain some sort of control until a new arrangement is in place. So you got all the remaining politicians that were alive and the capital of Lagos, brought them over to Parliament House. They all happily signed the document and handed over power to the military. Not because Ironsi forced them to. It's not like he put his gun to the heads and said, you guys must do this. Credit should actually go to a man by the name of Alhaji Ogunsoya. I'm sorry, Alhaji Abdul Razak, excuse me. This is too late. Abdul Razak, who was actually the first Northern SAN. So SAN in Nigeria is a term for senior advocate. So this is like their lawyers. You know, the higher you go in the field of law in Nigeria, you get the title SAN. Then you had people like Ozumba Mbadiwe and Chief Adeniro Agusaya, who were also present at this particular meeting. Now, those of you who know the roads, Adeniro Agusaya and Ozumba Mbadiwe, many people just like assume this is just like some random places, but these are named after prominent Nigerians. Ozumba Mbadiwe's backstory: he supported the NCNC, Azikiwe, left for a little bit, came back. He was involved in government before independence, mostly. Now, there was also a supreme military council that was set up, who basically they would get together with Ironsi and decide on things that were going to happen. I'll go into detail about them in a minute. And I want to stress something, guys, that Ironsi was not a civilian. Okay, he wasn't a politician. He didn't think like a politician. And he certainly wasn't designed to lead Nigeria, especially at that moment, because, you know, the main thing for him is keeping the peace. Okay, that was what that mattered to him. Remember, he was serving in the Congo so 1966. So maybe 2 years before he was in Congo, right? Or 3 years before he was in Congo. So he was not exactly even used to like a strategy in that sense. He was more concerned with, let's maintain some peace. This job of governing isn't for me. Okay. So what actually happens next? And I want to just quickly show you this, guys. The Unification Decree 34. Okay. How many of you have heard of this Unification Decree 34? Okay. Unification Decree 34 is actually very important if you want to try and understand the history of Nigeria, the country that we have today, okay? So let me try and do my best to explain it for you in a short space of time. Like, you have to consider the ethnic tension that was going on across the country. We talked about it last time. We talked about it, how it happened. Even in the first session, we discussed it. And now, in the army, for the very first time, Ironsi issues this decree, which meant basically that the military was the unified command of the country. Regardless of the ethnicity, the chief of army staff is the boss of any command. There was basically a federation, but with one unitary leader at the center. So no state police. The regions didn't hold, the same level of autonomy that they did before. And basically everybody had to look towards Lagos to decide things. How many of you have seen that happen in Nigeria recently? Of course, that's how it is. In other words, under this new agreement, you couldn't go and give orders to the army, okay? Because the army basically superseded the premiers, right? So if the premier, remember we talked about this last time. So if it was one of the reasons why we talked about why the North in the last session, why the Northern officers didn't dominate like the Eastern officers. The Eastern officers dominated the Army Officer Corps of Nigeria at the time, because in the North, power was with the premier. So the premier could essentially command the army, right? Same thing pretty much in the East to an extent. And then in the West, it was sort of like that, except that you had the capital city of Lagos, which was also in the West. So that was a conflict of interest. Okay. So under this new arrangement, basically the decree, abolished the federal system that was in place and made it more of a centralized power, which for the northern region was a problem. You see, the North was already, if you go back even to the pre-independence time, we talked about this again in session 1, the North was already complaining that Southerners were coming to dominate their jobs. They already felt threatened by Igbo dominance in politics, also the civil service. So they, at the time, didn't want this thing to happen. They wanted to keep things as they were. And the truth of it is that the principle of that same Unification Decree 34 that they're talking about is in force even today. And I don't think you need glasses to see that the people who have dominated have been the North, right? So generals dominated, if you remember your history, generals dominated from the 1970s, 79 to 83 briefly was a northern leader, but he wasn't a general. Then you had the 1980s, you had the Buhari, Babangida, Idi Agbon time period. 1990s, you had Abacha pretty much until the end of the 1990s, and then you have Abdul Salam Abubakar. Okay, northern generals ended up dominating and benefiting from this unification decree because all the money was centered in the capital of Abuja at that point, and basically they could run things how they wanted. There was no regional anything. Even the PDP and the APC, today, they practice it. It's the same thing. This whole idea of the central coffers of a country being with one person or one group, this started with this thing that Ironsi set up. And a side note, by the way, so Yakubu Gowon was in office for 9 years. Remember, he was chief of staff to Agui Ironsi. I don't want to spoil what will happen later, but eventually he becomes president. He runs the country for 9 years, and his first decree actually was to nullify this decree. Interesting. Yet, when it was his turn, he actually practiced it. Murtala Mohammed overthrew him after 9 years, practiced this same decree for 6 months when he was there. Then you had Obasanjo, who was there for about 3 years. Even Shagari, the civilian president, he practiced the same system. And then who else after that? Shagari was part of the Second Republic. And then you see, because you see, this particular decree is why, if you look at Nigeria today, right, it's why there's always been a northern or Muslim frontrunner for either a civilian president or otherwise. It's either Muslim or northern. It has to be, it's one or the other, or if not both, right? Even you look at the current incumbent of Nigeria, you go back, and I don't want to make this about religion, but this is a specific thing that is tied to that northern complex that was created by the British, okay? You go back to Obasanjo. Last time you had somebody from the south that wasn't a Muslim as head of state, you're going back, because even MKO Abiola, when he won, MKO is a Muslim. You go back as far as really Ironsi was the last one. I'm missing. No, Obasanjo, excuse me, and then Ironsi. Okay, it's also why we don't have one single Igbo/Eastern man or woman contend with a legitimate chance of winning since up until Peter Obi. Okay, so this whole decree is very important if you want to understand the history of Nigeria and why it's the way it is, why the system is the way it is, why they don't what's this thing they always call what's that phrase they always use that we should what's the word I'm looking for? They should always anyway, it'll come back to me, but this whole idea of splitting off and everybody doing their own thing. By the way, Decree 34 wasn't Ironsi's decision, okay? It was the Supreme Military Council at the time, which was actually dominated by non-Easterners, who basically gave him the control, who basically put it forward. And then what you had is you had the Attorney General at the time, and then some other members of the council that debated it, and then there was nobody who really opposed it, including General Usman Katsina, General Katsina, excuse me. And Katsina, by the way, is another one who throughout this 1966 was just flip-flopping left, right, and center. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. Anyway, Sha, let me move on. So as part of it all, the military would control each of the regions. And to calm things down even more, Ironsi would then send indigents of those regions to serve as military governor. Okay, so he would send Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu to the east. Katsina would be sent to the north. Then he sent Adekunle Fajuyi to the west as military governor. And then a guy called David Ejo, Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo was sent to the Midwest. Okay. And to appease the north, he also made Yakubu Gowon his chief of staff. Now, for those of you, Yakubu Gowon is still walking around, by the way. Yakubu had a Muslim name, Yakubu, but was from modern-day Plateau State, which is technically the Middle Belt today, technically, but at that time, it's considered the North. And even though he was also a Christian, he was a man that the Northern leadership, in particularly the officers of the North, could control. And this was Ironsi's I think this was Ironsi's biggest mistake, because essentially it contradicted his action to abolish the 4 regions, because then you're sending people off from those regions to go and rule them. And this whole concept of one Nigeria is like, okay, I understand why he did it. Everybody can understand why he did it, but ultimately it's creating more and more like confusion. Okay, so let's move on. People, I hope we're still here. So let's move on now. And so just to be clear, on this image, you see Ozumba Mbadiwe. You see, this is Ozumba Mbadiwe is on the bottom right. On the left is Ogunsoya, and then on top right is Yakubu Gowon. Next slide. All right, now I want to just want to use this time to just do a little plug. So we're talking about really the things that Ironsi had to deal with during his presidency, which didn't last long. It's like 190 something days. Was it even up to that? About 7 months. Yeah, about 6 months, sorry. Now, let me just do this and then I'll come back to the pictures. So, my people, have you heard of the 12-day revolution? Because this is one of the many things that Ironsi, again, a man who's not equipped for government, is having to deal with the complexities of the country, and then on top of that, has something called the 12-day revolution. You see, this is not directly related to the subject that we're talking about, but it's important if you want to, because it's a good thing to see this example that I keep bringing back to, the madness that was created by the British. This very, very stupid notion that they created 3 regions, and in those regions you have only 3 major groups in them, and that is what made up Nigeria. You see, I don't believe that there's anybody watching, will watch, who was not, unless you're from that part of the world, who was not raised to think that there was only Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba in Nigeria. Even in the regions that these groups occupied, there are hundreds, there can be up to hundreds of other groups who will all have a legitimate stake to that place. Me personally, it's not until I went to secondary school that I knew what Ishakiri was. I never heard of Ijaw people. I just thought anybody that answers the same name as Igbo people is Igbo. I thought everybody in the north, like north of Kwara State, for example, was a Hausa, and that they were all Muslim. That's what I thought. That's how I was raised to think. So how many of you know this story that I'm just showing you now? The 12-day, the story of the, oops, what have I just done? The story of the 12-day revolution. Where are we? 12-day revolution. Okay. Let me just explain this part quickly to you so that you can, I can also plug what I'm plugging, by the way. I'm plugging something quietly. I don't know, those of you who have caught it already, let's see. So let's just, in fact, let me go back. Let me go back to mini so you can see me a little bit more. Okay, so let's just deal with this 12-day revolution. So you can imagine Ironsi going from Congo to Lagos, right? It's coming out of the situation with Lumumba. Mobutu has taken over. Okay, let me go to Lagos. Might just balance for Lagos. Let me just chill, get fat. I'm coming up to retirement. That kind of thing. He's been in the army since the 40s. Like, let me just cool down. I'm a general. Let me enjoy my life. Now he finds himself all of a sudden having to stop junior officers in his army from assassinating him first, then stopping a coup, then having to round up all these perpetrators, trying to keep peace within the army, stopping other members of the army from retaliating and killing more Easterners from where he's from, even though he raised in the North as well. He's thinking, okay, the Northerners want revenge for the death of their leaders, which, is justified. Westerners had lost their premier. Akintola was murdered. And even their most prominent politician had been put in prison. So this guy is going from, I'm just trying to maintain the Congo, make sure these people don't, resort. It's not my country, so they can ship me out anytime. Now I'm back home and look at what I'm going through. And from his rear view, right, in February 1966, right, he's not paying attention to this part of the world because, again, everything in our heads is Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba. An activist by the name of Isaac Adakaboro, right, similar to Ken Saro-Wiwa some decades later, who had been basically watching the destruction of the Niger Delta area, okay? Which is sort of, I guess you can say that's sort of part of the Eastern region / Midwest, right? He got fed up and declared an independent nation called the Niger Delta Republic. He created a nation called the Niger Delta Republic, right? And side note, I wrote a book. This is the book that's just up here. Book on the far right. I wrote this book 13 years ago. Okay, it's called Another Biafra. It's based on a play I wrote about the ongoing Niger Delta oil crisis. Many groups like the Ijaw, especially the Ogoni people of the South, what they call the Southeastern Nigeria. The Ogoni people, when they have their most famous son is Ken Saro-Wiwa. Okay, I don't really need to promote the book that much because frankly I didn't publish it I only published it to protect my work, but as I was researching the background of the Niger Delta, I discovered this 12-day revolution. So I've only known about it for 15 years by now. Okay, so I just wanted to say that to you, and in case you're interested, the book is available on Amazon. Feel free to go and purchase it. As you can see, anyway, so yeah, Another Biafra. Another Biafra is the name of the book. You're very, very welcome to go and pick it up if you want. If you want to read the play, it's also there's also photos in the play. I acted in the play and I directed it, but that's a while ago. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So, can you imagine? And this is, I'm trying to set the scene here so that you can see how things work out. Can you just imagine if Ironsi's plan was for Igbo dominance, like people were portraying? Just think about how easy it would have been if he, Ojukwu, and whoever else supported this small nation, which again has control of the oil wealth of the nation, budding oil wealth. British had already discovered oil at that point, so people were already realizing, making projections of how much money Nigeria would make from oil. Plus, it's the gateway to the Eastern region. Instead, both Ironsi and Ojukwu were against Aboro's new nation. They were against this new nation from forming. So if anything, and I don't know, last time somebody said, who says this thing is, who says they call it an Igbo coup? Look, this thing is still talked about even today. People still say Igbo coup. Lack of education, I know, but it's very important. But doesn't this show that doesn't this show what I've been saying? The Igbos of Nigeria love to, and I'm an Igbo person, so I'm not gonna, this is criticism to us, I think, or Igbo people, is that we love to fight for a greater good of Nigeria, which is fine. Igbos like to be patriotic to a fault. They forsake their homeland. And really, I won't say it's a bad thing, but it isn't a good thing either, if you understand Nigeria. Because despite all the chaos, they continue to fight for one Nigeria when it was clear that the northern leadership didn't believe in that. Okay? So this 12-day war was exactly that. It was put down after 12 days. Isaac Adakaboro, he did his best, if you want to call it that. He was able to, they basically went to war with the federal government after declaring themselves independent. When they lost, Aboro was arrested. He later died fighting for the Nigerian army during the Civil War. Okay, so he didn't even fight for the Eastern region. Technically, they wasn't part of the Eastern region, but he aligned more with the federal government in the end. Okay, there's more to the story than that, but I wanted to just point that out to you. Genocide. Today's going to be a short one, so I'll come to your chats and super chats. Good to see a lot of people here. Genocide of Ndi-Igbo. Ndi-Igbo, again, for those of you who want to understand Igbo language, Ndi-Igbo is just another way of saying the Igbo people. The Igbo people. Umu. Umu is like saying the children of. So if you see Umu, prefix of Umu, UMU, then that is the children of. But Ndi-Igbo is like speaking of the greater people. Okay, so just to be clear. Genocide of Ndi-Igbo, May to September 1966. Again, and I want to really explain this thing because it was very obvious that the coup of January 66 was bloody. I'm not going to dispute that. Maybe it was more noble in its ideals. I'm not saying the revenge killings in what would be the July Coup were not noble, but the idea of and again, I'm not trying to excuse violence. I'm just saying it's still one of the, the January coup was something the northern leadership couldn't take. It makes sense. Of course, you murder all our leaders, prime minister, premier, many of our commanding officers. The rank and file of the army were swept up in the propaganda. Swept up. You know, they were like, these Igbos have killed our leaders. They then took over power. And they have not executed the coup plotters. They're still alive. They're still there. They're enjoying in prison. Kai, this is bad. They already want to take our jobs. Of course, they had the British in their ear. Remember, the British plan from the outset, for those of you who watched the first session, the British plan from the outset was to continue to rule Nigeria from the north. And to do that, they needed to dominate the south. Hence the propaganda, the census, the unfair size of the north, etc. Right? All those things that we discussed. So all of this culminated in the summer of 1966. All of this culminated in the summer of 1966. So you had northern soldiers of the Nigerian army. They went to what they call a Sabongari area of Kanu, where lots of Igbos, lots of Easterners, we have to be very clear that we're talking about Easterners. Many people even today many East Igbos cannot even differentiate between themselves and an Easterner in the classic term. All right, so let's just be clear. Many Easterners were there trading in the market, and they began Operation Wipeout. Hundreds of thousands of Igbos, Easterners, were massacred. And it was done at such an alarming rate, okay? Maybe even faster, maybe even faster if you think about it, than during the genocide in Rwanda, 1994. Because I look at the time frame and the numbers, right? And I urge all of you to look for a document by the name of it's called the Onyuke Report, Massacre of Ndi-Igbo. Onyuke Report. It's just there on the left-hand side. Let me see. Let me make it bigger for you. Oh God, it's not fully the way it should be. But atrocities and other inhuman acts committed against persons of Eastern Nigeria. I really advise that you look at this document if you want to truly understand this, what I'm about to say now, okay? Because, I mean, they talk about, you know, and the reason why I say it, by the way, is this document is the final result of a report that was done when Ojukwu had said, let's go and investigate the sheer number of people who died at the time. So he sent this man to go and investigate, do whatever research he could to find out. Okay, so when it was over, when it was done. Now, the document is harrowing, really. And this is why I bring up the Rwandan genocide. It talks about women's breasts being cut, people being beheaded on the street. I even, a couple weeks ago, I was with my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, who was in Lagos at the time. And she told me of how like dangerous things were at the time, right? How, you know, you're walking down the street. If somebody looks at you the wrong way, that you could just die on the spot, right? And then I think there's even a story I read, an article. Where did I read the article now? Is it in a book? I can't remember. Like basically, if you were caught by a soldier of Northern heritage, it was on for you. And unlike the Rwanda situation, this wasn't like a sustained, coordinated thing. It's not like the Rwanda thing was very coordinated, very like everybody knew what they were doing. The propaganda on RTLM. By the way, we did a series, or we did a live on Rwanda, the history of Rwanda, about a year and a half ago. So check it out. I'll probably link it below. But the Rwanda thing with RTLM, Hutu Power Radio, the Interahamwe, the way everybody was prepared for it, they knew once they got the signal, let's just go and kill everybody inside that we know is a Tutsi. Whereas this one, your name could be Basi. You might have a certain lighter complexion and work in the market. They just take you out, right? So they just assumed everybody who was from East or sounded Eastern was Igbo, right? So it wasn't as well coordinated. There were periods where it was, but in general, it wasn't coordinated. So they were basically sporadic attacks. So you would expect that the numbers, when it's sporadic, will be much lower than what happened in Rwanda, which is like 800,000 to 1 million, something like that. But when you read the report, though, the first massacre of Igbos, or Easterners, excuse me, in May numbered about 50,000. 50,000, the first massacre. Then the later, more universal massacre, if you will, of Easterners across Nigeria, according to Ojukwu, according to the Yokoye report, numbered in the hundreds of thousands. So, if you want to say that this was a retaliation for the coup, this is more than a retaliation for the January coup. This goes back to the amalgamation of 1914. You see, the sentiments of the North and the created fear of the South, created fear, because it is created. You look at the Kano riots, which we discussed in the first session, that took place in 1953. Finally, you look at the death of the Sardana, Sir Ahmadu Bello. This was about fear created by the British, implanted in the Northern leadership that Easterners, Igbos in their mind, but really Easterners, were coming to dominate them. You see, the intent of these murders was to impose, and I'll quote Ojukwu, was to impose the final solution to the Igbo problem in Nigeria. That was the intent. as far as the North was concerned anyway. And as we saw in Rwanda, especially in 94, because remember there are two genocides take place in 94. There's one in the 50s, 58, 59, and another in 94. The 94 one is the popular one. And certainly, I would say the more bloody one. And again, genocide is a big word. But the Biafra situation was truly a genocide. Look, again, those of you who know me, I'm half Igbo and half Tutsi. I'm half Rwandan, half Igbo. My mom is Tutsi, my dad is Igbo. So for my kith and kin on both sides to have experienced such atrocities pretty much almost at a similar time, if you think about the 59 one, it tells me that the Europeans got exactly what they wanted when they divided Africa up. Exactly what they wanted. And one reason why this particular one was not called a genocide at the time had to do really, I would say, with the Cold War. You got to look at the time period. We're talking about the period of the Cold War. Cold War time, you're either East or you're West. There was nothing in between. It's not like today. Well, today it is East and West kind of, but it's not seen the same way. There's still like a middle block. There's no gray area. There's nothing in between. It's your Eastern or Western, communist, capitalist, whatever. If this thing was to happen today, if what happened to Ndi-Igbo at that particular time was to happen today, it would be regarded in the exact same way as the Rwandan genocide, maybe even worse when you consider the war itself, okay? That of Rwanda or Yugoslavia, you could probably say this is in line with that sort of thing. So this is not me being it's not me being sentimental. But when you analyze this thing objectively, it's just no other conclusion. And I advise all of you, again, you can go online, go and look for the Ojukwu report. If you have the stomach to read it, it's online. Read it. And just being an Easterner at the time bound you to death in the North in some places, and even in Lagos, right? In fact, there's a story that I read about an army officer who was killed. I think it was from Calabar. He was from Calabar. He was walking on Carter Bridge. I think some northern soldiers pulled up next to him. Just assumed he was Igbo. Not that it mattered. He's an Easterner. And then they killed him on Carter Bridge. The man is actually from Calabar. They killed him on Carter Bridge. And hundreds of thousands of Igbos, Easterners, fled back home. Some of them had nothing, they had nothing with them. And those who stayed back in Lagos were herded and detained. Okay? Unless you had an ally, a Westerner who was an ally or somebody who liked your family or even another, those are the ways that you were protected. But for the most part, people were not trusting. And, when you look at it, right, you take what happened then, you take what happened during the war, people running home. Some of them still never, till today, have not got their property back. Their things that they left. In fact, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and was it Ali Baba? He was saying that something about the Onyeka Onwenu has been complaining. She just died recently, by the way, rest in peace. Had been complaining up until her death that the property that was her family owned in Lagos and in Port Harcourt, they never got back. So this is something which, again, let's take stock. We've done the series, the last two sessions, the sentiment has always been, this is where the problem is, but who is at the root of the problem? And this is all we are doing. Yes, there is death. Yes, it's at the hands of our brothers and sisters. But again, this imaginary European in our head is the one pulling the strings. We are merely puppets. And it's high time we start thinking like the puppet master, right? So back to the story. All this was happening and Ironsi was pretty much powerless. Ojukwu was military governor in the East. He was watching his people or people from his region being massacred helplessly. And he was, really limited in his actions because all he is the military governor of the East. Ironsi couldn't manage the situation because, let's face it would have meant him pissing off the military council. And then, some of the northern officers would have gotten angry. They felt hard done by the killing of their leaders anyway. So you see, we're all just victims of Nigeria. We're victims of Nigeria. We're victims of the British. And it's not to say that the different regions didn't have issues before, but the British forcing us together, imposing their way on us, imposing their way of life, is something that we cannot forgive. And I mean this very sincerely. We cannot forgive. Anyone who still thinks that these people have ever meant us well, you are deceiving yourself. They did something that was shameful, sinful, because now they have the privilege of looking at us like, oh no, look at those. Look at them. Look at them. Look at how they behave. Calling themselves civilized countries. Because your toilets flush, you're civilized. Because you have speed cameras, traffic lights that you cross that light, they fine you. You're civilized and we're not civilized. As if we had nothing to do with this place. We had nothing to do with the problems there. Anyway, so the killings went on till September of 66. But as you all know, something happened that July. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so let's just deal with it now, finally. This is probably going to be one of our last slides. The coup of July 1966. The coup of July 1966. Actually, before I move on, let me just quickly explain who's here. So we have Murtala Muhammad on the far left. On the far right, you have Theophilus Danjuma. The middle, on the left, you have Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi. And on the right, you have Agui Ironsi. Okay, Festus, I've just seen your comment. We'll talk about that in a bit. Festus, you're on tomorrow, by the way, so it'd be good to talk a bit more detail. But let's come to a close, and then we can open up for dialogue. Now, for those who still believe Ironsi was part of the January coup, conspiracy, I think it's important to read about how he dealt with the coup plotters. Okay, they were spread out. I think somewhere in the north, somewhere in the west. Eventually went east. Some were killed, by the way, when the war started and during the pogrom genocide period. And of course, the British pumped out this northern propaganda that they were treated well. Okay, so they, they're being treated well, they're being looked after, whatever. And all you have to do, if you want to understand just the state of how they were being treated, read Nzogu, which is the book by Olusegun Obasanjo. I think he included like 2 letters, I can't remember now. 2 letters written by Nzogu whilst he was in Kirikiri prison. You all have heard Kirikiri prison in Lagos. Read about the injuries that this man sustained from torture, for what they did. But of course, the propaganda, the optics of the thing, the Igbo-ness, even though Nzogu is not Igbo, in the eyes of Northerners, with British backing, of course, meant that something had to be done. Something more drastic had to be done. Why are these guys still alive? if the counter coup of July 66, and here's a counter coup, wasn't a random retaliation. In fact, it wasn't a random retaliation. It was planned. And according to Major General, who was it? Major General Jeremiah Husseini, they planned the coup over a period of a few weeks with Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed. For those of you who don't know, Lagos International Airport is based on a real person. Okay? He really lived. In fact, he lived only another 10 years after this whole time period. He was involved in a lot of bloodshed. And, he's no different to many others. But certainly, we have to really understand both sides of the legacies of our leaders. Part of this coup, you had Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed, you had Muhammadu Buhari, you had Sani Abacha. In a smaller way, you had Babangida. So I've just named you 4 guys involved in this coup. All of them became presidents, military presidents, and they were all involved. So this coup, and this is the reason why I say this, because some people say that, they were being opportunistic, it wasn't planned. No, they weren't being opportunistic. I think with the exception of maybe one person, most of those guys were considered to be from northern Nigeria, specifically Fulani or from the Hausa Bakwai. And I must also say that, they may have rallied around the geopolitical reasoning for this coup. Just to put some context to this, the geopolitics is what they rallied around, the kind of ethnic thing to an extent. But the truth is, half of them launched coups. Not half of them, I think all of them launched coups against themselves. In the decades to come, in some cases, people were killed. They went all, none of these guys died from, with the exception of maybe Abacha, but none of them died from the coup. But the people who perpetrated coups against them were killed. So it shows you again that the problem with Nigeria is not ethnic. It's not an ethnic division problem. It's a greed problem. It's instilled and maintained by Britain for over 100 years. We are celebrating today 64 years of independence in Nigeria, right? That's what they told me today's celebration. That's what I've been told since one is celebration. People are protesting across Nigeria, protesting in the diaspora. And why? Why are they really protesting? They're protesting because of greed. Greed of the politicians. How can you pay a senator of anywhere in the country 21 million naira? 21 million naira. When minimum wage is 60, what is it now? Is it still 30K or 60K, whatever it's gone up to? The greed has no religion. It doesn't care where you are from. As long as you're part of that political class, okay. But the greed is as true now as it was during the 1966 coup. It's all greed. Make no mistake about it. History will show you that Ironsi. In fact, let me take a step back, actually. Just back to the greed issue. I want to just point something out here, okay? We're not talking about the Biafran war. I'm not going to discuss it because it's far too... I don't think we should. I don't think it's necessary. But Sani Abacha, Aisha, is it Aisha? Mariam Babangida, who became the wife of Sani Abacha. For those of you who know some of the incidents that happened during the war, you have what they call the Asaba massacre, which is basically when the federal government troops went into Asaba whilst going to try and take on each other. There's some backstory to it, but they got not all, in a particular area, I think 2 small particular areas, they took the men and the boys and had them shot. Mariam Babangida, many of you don't know, is actually an indigenous of Delta State. She's from Delta. In fact, I don't know if she's Delta Igbo or she's Delta. What is she? I think she's Delta Igbo. I'm not sure. Her uncle and I think her father, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember now. I was working on a documentary during COVID. I was supposed to go and shoot there, so we had to do the research. One of her either her uncle or her grandfather, I can't remember, was murdered whilst she was married to Babangida. You have, if you watch Uputa panel, they had a general. God, what's this northern general's name? What's his name now? Anyway, I can't remember. This, by the way, is 11 o'clock at night, so forgive me, guys. What's his name? But anyway, you had these generals, northern generals, intermarrying with women from the southeast. Even today, go to the north, they intermarry. So this whole ethnic thing, we have to look at it a little bit more closely. It's too superficial. It is a greed problem. It is a greed problem. Let me get back to my point. So, Ironsi, I believe, had been warned several times, just like Bello, just like Balewa, they were warned. Look, these people will come and get you. They could come and kill you. Be careful. And frankly, he had to have known. He had to have had an idea. In fact, there's a really good book which I rescued from my father's library before he died, by Alex Madiebo. It's called Madiebo, I think, was commander of Nigerian Artillery Regiment. He later became GOC of Biafran Army, so General Officer Commanding of Biafran Army. But he wrote a book called The Nigerian Revolution and the Biafra War. I don't know if I have it here. Nigerian Revolution and the Biafra War. And the book basically talks about the fact that Ironsi even allowed Gowon, his chief of staff, to sit in the meetings as he was being warned, thinking that, oh, the army was, united, all that type of stuff, okay, he's listening. Ironsi then will tell Gowon, please go and deal with this matter. Go and, if he's hearing that people are talking about this, like, go and arrest these people, go and deal with this thing. Of course, Gowon did nothing. And all the while, Gowon's brigade of guards that he's assembling for this new government, he started putting people from his part of the country in there. Okay, I think he even had General Garba, who my father worked with, by the way. But anyway, Ironsi was an army man. Okay, so he wasn't an administrator. He's just a man who found himself as head of state. He wasn't ready to lead a nation. And he tried desperately for diplomacy. And what he didn't know was that northern foot soldiers had been conditioned by their superiors to think that their commanders were planning on killing them. So, for example, I read that, which book is this now? I can't remember now. I think it's wrong tip. I can't remember which book. But anyway, that in some barracks in Ibadan, for example, some barracks in Ibadan, at the barracks in Ibadan, that they would be speaking, that the northern soldiers would be speaking in Hausa, instigating their brothers that, these are our commanders, so, they're getting ready to kill us, so let's be careful. So, for example, you go to the officers' mess, and all of a sudden, everyone is sat with people, Easterners with Easterners, Westerners, Northerners, that kind of thing. Instead of, their companies or their regiments or even their ranks, according to ranks, right? So things got hot, of course. And on the eve of 29th of July, 1966, the evening before 29th of July, not the evening, sorry, the eve, a few days before, after visiting the north and traveling to the north to calm things down, calm the tensions down, speaking to Madiebo, Ironsi then returned to the south and went to rest in Ibadan with his friend, Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi, who was military governor at the time. He left Gowon in charge. And the truth of the matter is, when you analyze things, when you break things down and you look at who is still around and how they benefited from the whole situation, you have to say Gowon either led the coup or was so close to the planning of the coup, or what they call the counter coup of July. He knew what was being planned from the beginning and was basically a willing participant. You know, he didn't act, he didn't like physically shoot or do anything, but he was a willing participant in another way, right? So here's what happened. Gowon apparently telephoned Government House in Ibadan, where Ironsi was staying at the time, right? The morning of the coup, he calls up, and then Major Danjuma, Theophilus Danjuma, who I showed in the previous slide, picks up the phone. Then what happens is Gowon supposedly asks him, "Hey, Ironsi is there, right?" So yeah, can you arrest him for me? Basically, he's saying, I'm a superior officer. I'm asking somebody who's subordinate to me, my junior, to do a job. I could have done this job myself. I'm with him 24/7, but can you go and do it for me? Because I can't. In his own, this is basically painting the picture that he wasn't man enough to do it when he was in the presence of Ironsi. So, are we really supposed to believe that this man, Ironsi is pretty much his number two, pretty much, sat back, watched them arrest him and Fajuyi, killed them, didn't arrest the killers, he just accepted the role as president? I mean, let's get real, guys. Let's be real. Again, we're looking at history. None of us, there are very few people who are still around who lived through it. Certainly from the point of view of government, everybody's dying. We're looking at it in hindsight through history, and we're trying to figure out whether this thing makes sense. It's like, actually something similar happened with the coup that brought Buhari into power. Buhari acted the whole time like, oh, I didn't plan it. It was basically organized by him, but he claimed that, I was just there, they just told me I should become president. Oh, they just told me I should become. You see, this is why critical thinking and history, I think, societies that know the power of history are more advanced because of this. They have critical thinking and a sense of history. It's important in our society. We like to believe nonsense. We like to believe stupid nonsense. Gowon was in Lagos, right? At Ikeja Cantonment. Those of you who know Ikeja Cantonment, opposite GRA now. I think they moved it, but now it's in Ikeja Cantonment. It's opposite GRA. He was there with his forces, with his army. He didn't move. Ikeja and Ibadan is not far. For those of you who don't know, it's not a long journey, especially if you have army vehicles. You're going to bypass everything. So anyway, at the governor's lodge in Ibadan, the people that were protecting Ironsi became the people who attacked him and arrested him. In fact, Ironsi's son, Thomas, I think is his name, who later became an ambassador under Obasanjo, I think he served in Togo, was with him at the time. I think he was like 12, I think. He said he just came back from holiday in the UK, where he was attending school. And basically, he watched as his father was taken away. He did an interview on Arise News some years ago. You guys should check it out. And please, I'm not saying Ironsi's blood is worse than any other. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the killings during the first coup, as horrible as they were just as bad in terms of blood as the second coup. So we have to be sensitive that loss of life is horrible. You leave families, you leave, and in some cases, many people didn't really deserve to die, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying, in fact, let me not go down that route when we start talking about deserve. But anyway, where was I? Anyway, so the killings during the first coup were as horrible as the second. So let's just be clear. In fact, I would say that the first coup led by Nzogu, Ifajuna, Ademoyiga, and co., it set a precedent of killing during military changeover in Nigeria. Not to say that this is unique to Nigeria, but as far as Nigeria is concerned, it set a precedent, which really didn't stop until after Murtala Mohammed. If you remember what happened with Murtala Mohammed, the Mercedes-Benz shootouts in the middle of Lagos, right? Murdered, bludgeoned, and his car is still in the museum today. Anyway, so Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi, military governor of Western Region, he was basically seen, this is the story, this is the narrative, there's a book about him as well, this is the narrative that they paint. And again, this is why critical thinking, you have to read quite a few different books to really get a clear picture. So he's seen as the man who sacrificed his life, right? He sacrificed his life instead of letting go of his guest, who was Ironsi at the time. You know, and I'm okay with that. But I think we need to look at this a little bit closer because, you know, it doesn't fully add up, okay? There was a guy by the name of Lieutenant Sani Bello, who was ADC, the Army ADC. ADC is aide de camp, which is sort of like, not an assistant, but ADC at the time. There was also a guy called Lieutenant Andrew Wankwo, who was from the Air Force. There was also the Secretary of Government who was also there with him. And basically their accounts in the book Ironsi, Nigeria, People and Power, whatever the book is called. God, I can't forget. Oh my God, my brain. He was basically saying that as soon as the perpetrators, the people that eventually killed Ironsi, as soon as they saw him and Fajuyi, they started hitting them. That by the time they put them in the car to take them away, they were bloodied. And of course, they took them away and were killed. Now, some historians on the subject believe Fajuyi was in the know of the coup, but he didn't participate. So in a way, you could say the guy was complicit. And apparently, the story goes that Theophilus Danjuma was supposedly sent to just arrest them. That was the plan. This is the plan, that was the thing that was put out afterwards, that he was sent to just arrest them. And something happened, he couldn't handle it, so he ended up killing them. And anyway, long story short, by morning, Yakubu Gowon, chief of staff for Ironsi, had become president. Whereas Ironsi, Fajuyi, and others had been killed. The violence against Easterners continued. Not because Gowon said so, let's give him some credit, but because he couldn't control the Northerners in the army, specifically the officers. Because they had somewhat put him in power. And again, I'm not making out that every officer from the North was part of this, but I'm just saying that the rank and file have been fed this BS, which really they didn't mean. Go and read Emeka. Emeka talks about how when a lot of these guys lived in the North. There had to be some relative peace and harmony, because even now, many moved back, even with all the problems. So this is not a common theme. These people can live in harmony. It's not like, oh, they've never lived in harmony, right? In fact, Gowon even said that, oh, why are we still killing the Igbos? You know, it's not necessary anymore because, you know, the Northerners are now in power. Can you imagine this man saying this thing? You know, I know he was like 30 or 31, however old he was, but I mean, these are, you know, and of course, now the North is in power again after seeing Bello and Balewa murdered, assassinated, seeing the Igbos come in and in their mind take over. Now the North is back in power. So the conversation about seceding came up. It came up again. The North nearly broke away when Gowon said, he basically said that there's no real need for unity in Nigeria anymore. There's no basis for unity in Nigeria, right? And it's interesting. I was watching, where did I watch it now? He was saying, what was this interview I was watching? That he said, he said that he never said this. That he never said there was no basis for unity in Nigeria, but he had been recorded saying it by BBC and whatever other outlets that were covering it at the time. He wanted to proclaim a republic of northern Nigeria. We had Niger Delta Republic that didn't last 12 days, and now we're about to have Republic of Northern Nigeria. It was the US ambassador at the time, a guy by the name of Ambassador Matthews, and the British High Commissioner, this guy's name, Bruce at the time, I think. Call me Bruce. Is it call me Bruce? Festus, I beg, if you know, double check. I think it's call me Bruce. Those were the people that went in his ear and said, no, you can't do this. Why? Because, of course, US, Britain, petroleum, hey, you can't separate from the South. And coincidentally, and I want to make this point for those of you who watch football, a day after this coup, the same England, this same England that we're talking about, they won their first ever World Cup. This World Cup that they've been singing about 1966 is 60, whatever years, 58 years ago. They're still talking about it. So basically, it's fair to say, on that day, they won politically, they won in sports, because for the next 9 years under Gowon, while he was in power, they and America and other like multinational companies had full access to the wealth of Nigeria. This is really the beginning. Over the next decade and a half, you would start to see the brain drain. This Nigerians running to the UK, running to America. You start to see it because of this. So it's a very important time period. We get independence in 1966. The entire leadership, from the army to the politicians, is over. Over. All those years of fighting from independence, Herbert Macaulay time in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, in 6 years, done. Head of the army, most high-ranking major general. And then all of a sudden, what did Sani Abacha, Babangida, Buhari do to become generals? Do we know? Anyway, let's move on. I think this is penultimate slide before we move on. Thank you, people. Thank you, people, for tuning in. I appreciate this. Penultimate slide, and then we'll go to your questions and comments. Did Ojukwu have to proclaim Biafra independent, basically? And actually, let me go back. So here you see, top left, you see an image of him with Gowon. Top right, you see the Biafran flag. Bottom left is the historic day when Biafra was proclaimed an independent nation. And then bottom right is Ojukwu again, a portrait image that was taken of him. So let's get to this. Let's get to this. Okay. So did Ojukwu have to declare war in 1967? Did he have to declare Biafra as an independent nation? So again, there's been a lot written and documented about, Republic of Biafra. And it's too sensitive for some people, okay? Some people say, Ojukwu, he was greedy for power, he was ambitious, he went to Oxford, he likes to talk. But the simple answer is, if people are beating, punching, spitting on you, taking what you have, you defend yourself. And there's no question that this is what was happening to Easterners of the Federation, across the Federation. And Ojukwu he wasn't like other people, he couldn't really be bribed. He's son of a billionaire or millionaire. And certainly, if you look at some of our Eastern leaders, a lot of them, could easily be bribed. He was a principled guy. He couldn't accept his people dying like rats. He said we must do something about this. He said, and I think the federal government under Gowon knew this about him. If you read the book Emeka by Forsyth, you will find that Emeka had no respect whatsoever for Gowon. I think they were a similar rank. He didn't rate him at all. In fact, during the killings, he would call, Gowon would be calling Ojukwu as part of the military council to attend meetings. And he just flat out refused. Like, I'm not going. Okay, this is after Ironsi died. In fact, if you remember, Gowon and the federal government needed Ojukwu to release Awolowo. And I think they probably did it. I guess you could say they did it so they could get some like legitimacy, right? Because Gowon wasn't taken that seriously. He's a puppet. And it's quite possible, I would say, I don't know for fact, but it's quite possible that Ojukwu released Awolowo in such a way because he felt maybe Awolowo would go and support the federal government and then be more, and would see the Biafran situation a little bit differently. But let's remember that Ojukwu had been quartermaster general of the Nigerian army only a few years before 66. And so if there was not even a few years, I think a year before, if I'm not mistaken, if war was on his agenda from then, the man would have organized things in such a way where he would have fortified the East, with the right arms for, from the beginning, they would have had the right stuff that they needed. Instead, they had nothing to use when war was declared. They started creating the Ogbunigwe, the rockets, handmade, indigenous rockets, if you want to call it that. That was what they were using to fight. They had to create that. The Biafran officers didn't even have uniforms. They didn't have bullets. They said, if you watch that documentary they made, the Nigerian Biafran War, it came out like in the early 90s. There was one officer that said that our enemies were our quartermasters, right? Which basically says that I have to kill this Nigerian federal officer in order to take his gun so I have a weapon. I have to kill this guy so I can get some boots, right? And if you go and study the two battles of Onitsha, just see that the Biafrans would have, if they had the proper arms, if they were properly kitted, they would have stood a better chance of winning the war. I guess winning, it's hard to say, because ultimately, how could they have ever won against the might of Britain? But it would have given them a better chance. But he didn't do that. And if we focus on the facts on the ground, we will see that in the period of Nigeria's history, up until that point, nobody, and I repeat this, nobody had been killed in Nigeria like people from the East, particularly people who were perceived to be Igbo. And at that point, you look at it properly, in all of Africa, at that point, 66 we're talking about, there was no one that was being killed like people from Eastern Nigeria. Think about it. Go and do, again, let's be less sentimental and look at our research. The Congo situation is a different situation because it ended up being a war. Angola hadn't kicked off yet. Rwanda, many of the people who had been killed during the crisis, the mini pogrom of 59, in Burundi as well, they all fled to different countries. They fled to Uganda and so on. So really, at that point, no one was being killed like people from the East. And we later see during the war how they were bombing churches, market squares, schools, starvation of children. Yes, to an extent, you can accept that that's part of war, that, you do things like that. But when you look at it in its totality, no one was being dealt with like the way Easterners, perceived Igbo people were being treated. So now, obviously, we're speaking in hindsight. I wasn't there. I can only speak to my in-laws, my parents who were there. And I can only look at the books that have been written by people who were there. That's all we can do. And that's what we should do as historians, is see the first-hand accounts and make an analysis. But I have to say, maybe it would have been better for Ojukwu to wait until the people were ready to sustain being independent to an extent. Maybe have the right allies, bring in the right arms to bring in the things that they need, so that they went on the back foot from the get-go, and by that time, of course, by the time September of 66, Azikwe, actually no, by the time of Biafra had been formed much later in 67, Azikwe began to work as an envoy for the Biafran cause, if you will. Okay, outside of Nigeria, of course, because it's Azikwe, it's not going to be in the line of fire. And he could have maybe, with his connections and his reputation, he could have garnered some support. But the simple truth is, the federal government attacked them and they defended themselves. So in the end, to create some sort of peace, right? And to end the violence against Easterners, maybe to prevent war from breaking out, you see Gowon and Ojukwu go to Abri in Ghana for peace talks, and they go at the start of January 67, which coincidentally, I believe, is when Ironsi was buried. I think it was buried in January or February of 67. Ghana, of course, was chosen. Abri in Ghana was chosen because of, Ojukwu just quite simply didn't feel safe anywhere else in the Federation, except obviously in the East. So the reality is, whatever was agreed at Abri, and again, you can go and read it. There's enough. They've never made a documentary about it, but there's some footage and some images that you can find on YouTube as well. What was agreed at Abri was never going to be adhered to by the federal government, simply because of the British involvement. It was just too much. Britain knew the capability of Ojukwu. They knew his education. They knew even that the Federation wasn't well prepared for war themselves. They didn't have many good officers at the time. The East had a few. Again, remember we talked yesterday about the officer corps of the higher level of the military being mostly Easterners. They even had to go to heavily recruit and promote people, promote officers, and then recruit rank and file so that they could compete with Biafra. Because Biafra is obviously fighting this, what's the word? Symbolic war of for their freedom, so to speak, But the Federation, their real strength lay in the alliance with Britain and whoever. So everything that was agreed at Abri between Gowon and Ojukwu, as soon as they returned to Nigeria, Gowon denied everything. In fact, I think Ojukwu said, I insist we must record these. Let's have these tapes. Let's record these tapes to hear what was said. And I think they published them later. I'm still yet to hear them. But basically, Gowon contradicted himself. By this same, and we're talking about this same Gowon, who is still walking the earth today. Gowon is still walking the earth today. The man is still, what is he, close to 90, if not 90, What could Ojukwu do but declare Biafra independent? And that's what he did. 6th of July, 67. about a year, just under a year after the assassination of Ironsi and Fajuyi. You see the red, black, and green flag modeling Garvey's UNIA, Marcus Garvey's UNIA flag was hoisted up. And it's very apt because when you think of Azikwe being a Garveyite, supporter of Marcus Garvey, he's actually partly responsible for the anthem of the Biafrans, of the Biafran nation, and they fought for 2.5 years. 2.5 years of bloody war began Eastern Nigeria, and the East, since that war, is yet to, they've not paid their penance for seceding, and yet to fully recognize the power of propaganda, the power of self-development, the East has failed to do, both in their minds and also politically. So there's no real point for me, excuse me, I'm not of the opinion that we need to be clamoring for an Igbo president just so we can have an Igbo president. I'm not one of those people. I'm not even clamoring for an Eastern president. Okay, it would be nice, of course, for the thing to be shared, but when we cannot even put our own house in order with good governance, look, the Easterners, Igbo people, and so on, when it comes to the development of manpower, yes, they have it. You have lawyers, you have doctors, and it's been like that for a long time across Igboland. You have entrepreneurs and so on. They should focus on being a beacon of Nigeria. Igbos, Easterners are not inferior, when it comes to their population. They're not inferior, right? But there are only 5 states that they've been given. Only 5. Population-wise, you would argue they're probably, if you split them into the several regions, certainly you look at the census of 62, South was far more, and that's East and West. They have one of the highest population densities in Africa. Yet, if you look at the northern states, they can be significantly larger in size. Of course, they're resilient. Otherwise, and Igbo people, Easterners are resilient people, right? That's how they bounced back after the war, But again, I have to criticize this, the ability to think collectively. How many Easterners would sell their history for 10 pieces of silver? They're everywhere. Look at Governor Rochas, former Imo State governor. They don't care about the plight of their people. I went to my hometown. Onitsha has some of the worst roads you'll see in Nigeria. They've improved a little bit. Some of the worst roads. The development of the East is terrible. I know the North is bad, but East is terrible. When you consider these billionaires building these palaces in their villages, the average Easterner, Igbo person specifically, will kill his own brother for land. But this isn't a problem of Igbo people. This is a problem of Nigerians. Because wherever you go, whatever group you are finding yourself in, every single pocket has people that think like this. So I want to just do something quickly before we finish, all right? And I want to just do this in a wrap up and then take your questions. And some people are really, even on TikTok, people are getting crazy and angry. This is why I like these topics. People get really passionate about it, but we have to look at, we've done a series over 3 nights now, and we've talked about things in totality, right? What would Biafra have been today? Imagine they were successful. Imagine Biafra succeeded. And there you have the 5, just above there, you have the 5 states. See how tiny Igboland, if you want to call it that, which really, I suppose you could call it fully Igboland. And then below you had Nnamdi Kanu. But let me just let's just talk a little bit before we wrap about let's talk about this before we wrap up, and then I'll take your questions. So we like to fantasize. Okay, and again, I want to stress I'm from Anambra State, Onitsha town. Okay, I won't say my village, but Onitsha city is where I'm from. We like to fantasize that Biafra was this perfect thing, and that if it was given a chance, it would have been the savior of the Igbo people. And I'm not one who, I'm a dramatist. I write stories for a living, but I'm not one who agrees with this one. Not one bit. I'm sorry. I believe Biafra would have fallen to the same fate as Nigeria is in now. You see, the Biafra government, when they created the government, they had 10 provincial areas. And remember, Biafra land is not these 5 states that you see in Nigeria. They extended to the Akwa Ibom, those type of people too, down to the creeks, down to River State. Yes, there are some Igbos there, but not really. It's not any, but 10 provisional areas. So it was a confederation of different people, basically. The people within it were they weren't actually, let me put it this way. The people who lived within that confederation were not all Igbos. And would have been, they contained several other minority groups who would have wanted their own say in how things were being done. Okay, Ojukwu was head of state, Effiong was number 2. To an extent, you would think that Ojukwu would have found a way to keep people going. But if they were successful, once the euphoria of, okay, we've won the war is over, then what? Then what? Now, if you look at Nigeria today, there's this, what they call the Southeast Geopolitical Zone. It's been totally destabilized by Abuja, right? In fact, they use area boys to go and attack prisons, attack police stations. There are times that you'll be driving to the east, they're attacking armored police cars. How can something like that happen when you have a federal government in place? This is not unique to the Southeast. Go to the north. Isn't it the same chaos that's going on in the north? I have a friend who's I think I mentioned him last week. He's an army corporal, former army corporal. He told me to look, Sambisa Forest, you are basically, as a soldier, they won't arm you. Your young people won't arm you. And then these Boko Haram people, they are in cahoots with the army officers. So the problem of Nigeria is not unique to the East. Yes, we are looking at a particular time frame where this happened, but it didn't happen. The antecedent of this thing happened doesn't go back hundreds of years. It goes back purely to the amalgamation by the British. Take Buhari now. Buhari was head of state, military head of state in 83 to 85. He tried to kidnap Umaru Diko from London, right? By the way, I've just made a movie called Catching a Thief, which is it's a modern day adaptation of the whole Diko affair. We shot it end of last year. It's in post-production. Be out early next year. Catching a Thief. It's got Wale Ojo, Nollywood actor, Nigerian. I hate the word Nollywood, but Nigerian actor. It's got a guy from called Frank Harper from Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels. Anyway, so yeah, we made a film. But anyway, Buhari tried to kidnap Umaru Diko from London, the whole crate thing in 84. 30 years later, when he became civilian president, 30 years later, he sent agents to Kenya to kidnap Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya. Now, Nnamdi Kanu, his people, the IPOB in retaliation, in frustration, in protest, this whole sit-at-home thing has happened in the East. I don't know if those of you know what sit-at-home is. On a Monday in the East, you don't move. You don't move your car. You don't move your house. You don't go to work. Because of Nnamdi Kanu's arrest. So when IPOB, that's Indigenous People of Biafra, first ordered sit-at-home, right? It wasn't a voluntary thing. Now you have so many different voices. There's people even in the diaspora that are calling their own different sit-at-homes on different days. Some say once a month, some for Biafran Remembrance Day. I mean, it speaks to the same problems of the Federation. Yes, we want to focus solely on this thing, but try and look at this thing. You see, we're Africans first. We have to, in this world, be Africans first, not these small segments. We have to look at how everything is happening and see the patterns. Now, back to Nnamdi Kanu, because I think it's an important point. The Supreme Court, or whoever, Tinubu himself, needs to either pardon him or release him or something. You know, I watched an interview with someone who said that the longer they keep him in prison, the longer they legitimize the cause for Biafra. But Biafra cannot be, you know, Biafra cannot be if it's claiming everyone within that place, right? It can't be fair, because there are some that don't identify as Igbos. So Biafra, if this whole IPOB point of view of Biafra would end up becoming like, you know, one group of oppressed people who go from being oppressed to becoming oppressors themselves. Look, America is an arrogant place. It's arrogant because it defeated its own oppressors, its colonial masters, the British. And 1776, it became independent, declared its independence. Now, because of that, they continued enslaving African people, but they also went around the world misbehaving, frustrating people, showing off, annexing places, and imposing their own way of doing things on others. You look at Israel, similar thing with Israel. There are some Israelis, and really I use that term loosely, let's just say Jews, if you want to call them that. Well, Hebrew speaking, what's the word? What's the name of the place again? God, my brain. What am I looking for? Anyway, there's some, if you look at the state of Israel, Israel was formed from a group of oppressed people who eventually took a country of people, and then oppressed the people that were there. And it's all coming to a head now, 80 years later. So let me stress that Nnamdi Kanu, who, by the way, thinks he's a Jew, but anyway, must be released. The last time they released him, if you remember a few years ago, about 7-8 years ago now, they went to his father's house. They killed people, you know. Release the man in the best interest of Nigeria. After all, if you look at other people that had similar charges, you had Sunday Igbo, Omoyele Sowore, who again I've made a documentary about, which is also on the channel, 2-part series, Revolution Now. Check it out. They released all of them. In fact, Sowore went back home to America. And he's now back in Lagos for the protest, still protesting. But when it comes to Nnamdi Kanu, he's going to his 6th year in solitary confinement. Can you release the man, let him end this sit at home, so that the East, Igboland, can start to develop again. Release him also because it's the right thing to do. Okay. I'm going to wrap up this conversation. So, conclusions, because this is the end of the series that we began about 2 weeks ago, where we were discussing, for the most part, how Nigeria was formed, but with the aim to discuss the coups and what caused the coups. I'm hoping that everybody at this point has seen that this problem starts and ends with Britain, and Britain benefits the most from this problem. Maybe Britain can be, you could slash Britain USA if you want. And if you look at the likes of Burkina Faso with Traore, and the radical approach they're having towards government, when you look at various other places, Niger, Chad, these other places who are starting to align with the old East, you now start to think that perhaps the time for Nigeria to pivot away from these people is important. So to summarize, Nigeria's history is based on ethnic suspicion. First by the colonists, and then by the principal actors themselves that we discussed, the Zeeks and so on. By giving the North their advantage of size, Britain contributed to the downfall of Nigeria from day one. From day one. What we are seeing now is a direct result, not a proxy, through proxy, not a chain of event. It's a direct result. What we see in Africa, the problems that we face in Africa, are a direct result to the people who controlled it and put those places together. So the truth is, Nigeria never stood a chance. All of us don't like the country that we are from, if those of you are Nigerian, but Nigeria never stood a chance. You see, the British formed 3 regions. They used one dominant ethnic group to rule each region. You could say some emerged naturally, if you want to call it that. The Sokoto Caliphate, the Fulanis controlled Hausa land. In the West, everyone sort of generally spoke Yoruba, but you had the powerful Oyo, slightly smaller Egba people, and so on. But it was still, some form of control at the time. In the East, you had the Igbos. You had the various groups that made up the Igbos. Some who were coming off Bini empires, the end of the Bini Empire. So, in a nutshell, these groups that were controlling these areas still had smaller groups who at some point would have fought, and at the time would have fought for a say in those regions. They would have they would have struggled for freedom from those larger regional groups. And again, this is truly the downfall of Nigeria. It's not Igbos, it's not Hausas, it's not South, it's not North, it's not oil, it's not the army. Nigeria's problems began with the arrival of the missionaries, and the missionaries created part of the chaos in the South, even though Nigeria wasn't in existence. And when we understand it from that point of view, not the I better pass my neighbor mentality we have, you will start to see Nigeria from a different point of view. As a child that seriously needs its mother to come and comfort it. And again, your mother is your lineage. Who are we outside of this last 100 years? When we start to see things like that, we'll start to move forward. So my people, I thank you so much for tuning in today. Let me take wow. Okay, a few comments. Mr. Festus, thank you so much. Appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much. Miss, oh, look at this. I have not seen you, Galactic Soul, for a minute. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. All right, let's read some of your comments. Kwame Alatuja, I have missed the first two programs. We'll need to catch up. Please. In fact, Kwame, where have you been? I've not seen you for a minute. This is the first time you're tuning in, so good to see you, brother. Wait, let me remove this. Good to see you. Oh. Remove this. Okay. All right. The Festus. The massacre of Igbos was planned and coordinated. It wasn't sporadic. I would say in parts it was, and in parts it wasn't. That's my analysis. And I use the Rwandan genocide to compare it because the Rwandan genocide was a sustained, structured massacre. Whereas the one that occurred with Easterners, gotta be careful about the phrase, with Easterners was slightly more, at times, unplanned. Certainly there are accounts of, it's not like they said, everybody, we have a list of people we're going to take you out. Because this was the case in Rwanda in 94. So that's why I use that example. Again, and I also mentioned, by the way, that in general, it wasn't sporadic. It was sporadic in general. The massacre were widely spread in the north and peaked on 29th May, 29th July, and 29th of September 66. Very good. Yep, good point. Yakubu was deposed on the 29th of July. OBJ was sworn in on 29th of May until 2018. Democracy Day was celebrated annually. What am I missing? Okay, is this, you're making like a numerology thing. Is that what you mean? Okay, excellent. Jimmy, the rematch. I assume you're referencing the England winning the World Cup. I think that's what you mean, right? The fall of Constantinople, the capture of the capital of Christian Byzantine Empire by the Islamic Ottoman Empire. Are you having it? Okay, well, these are just dates that in history. 29th of May. Let me draw up another one for you. 29th of July is my father's birthday. Anyway, Murtala was a war criminal. Thank you. Look, Murtala Mohammed is, again, look, we can look at it from the point of view of the individuals, definitely. And, war criminal is a war criminal. But this is why I mean, like, we have to get away from the pointing. I agree with you. He's a war criminal. The atrocities that he's been that he's been alleged to have committed during the war. Because remember, he was commander in Asaba, by the way, I think. Certainly, I think he was commander in Asaba as they went in. And he was never court-martialed for the Asaba massacre either. But on the flip side, anyway, no, let me not use the flip side. But yeah, he absolutely is. So is Buhari. Yeah, Buhari took part in our first coup. So, and it was a violent coup for sure. Biafra was Britain's Vietnam War to maintain its hold on Nigeria through their proxy. Evidence shows that Britain's hands and PM Harold Wilson were behind the scenes. Absolutely. And Harold Wilson, I think, visited Nigeria just before the war kicked off. And I think with the Labour Party, and because Harold Wilson battled heavily to become prime minister, and between the late 60s and early 70s, he was constantly contesting. And you have to remember the colonial office of Britain was still an important place even at that point, because colonial office, even though Britain had so-called left its colonies, the colonial office was still important in understanding, in keeping tabs on Britain's interests around the world. And Nigeria was a big interest. Lizzie, thank you. So it's 70K now, right? 70K is minimum wage, yeah? Okay. Ironsi's bodyguards were mostly northerners. Gowon was his chief of staff. Ojukwu warned I think you mean Ironsi, about Northerners in his circle. Ironsi said to Ojukwu, yeah, these are my boys. That's also in the book, Emeka. I think, I haven't read the book in years, but I think Ojukwu, Forsyth mentions the conversation that they had. Ojukwu warned Ironsi about the Northerners in a circle. Ignorantly said to Ojukwu, those are my... Okay. Greetings. I hate that word, dread, by the way. But thank you. Greetings, my brother. Big up, respect back. The like. Yes, thank you. Everybody hit the like button. Hit the like button, please. Please do it now. Do it now. I beg. England since then, how far? Exactly. They haven't won nothing. They haven't won anything since then. And anyway, leave them. They'll get theirs. The society is declining. The economy is declining. It's on its way out. Operation Araba to succeed from Nigeria was underway. Gowon was going to announce on TV and radio until Britain and their American friends advised the North to stay. I did say, what was the name of the... Did I get it right? Who the name of the British High Commissioner? But anyway, Lizzie, very sensitive, I know. And I think what everybody can conclude throughout this series is that I have criticized every side, but ultimately we've kept referring to the same perpetrator that we must look at. You see, because again, when Usman Dan Fodio came and did his jihad and took over northern Nigeria and then came as far down as Lokoja and certain parts of quote-unquote Yoruba land, he was doing it in the name of Islam, not in the name of Nigeria. So if he's doing this in the name of Islam, and then the British come and use it to their advantage and say, okay, do this in the name of Nigeria, now it becomes a bigger problem. So everybody has their agendas, but it's the decision to put them together that creates this far bigger problem that we all, 200 and something, whatever the population, million people are dealing with now. The great leader Ojukwu. Yeah, I mean, again, we don't know what he would have been. We don't. How many heroes of independence become something else? You just don't know. You don't know. But certainly from what he achieved, what he tried to do, he's regarded as, and this is the thing, we have to be fair. We have to be clear and fair. Ojukwu is a man who is incredibly impressive. But when the time came and he went to Ivory Coast, okay, fine. In his book, they describe it as, he didn't know necessarily what he was getting himself into. But on the flip side, he left. So we have to weigh these things up, and I'm a fan of him, certainly, but this is history, This is history. Everybody's going to be judged on two sides. The North was the first to declare Biafra a breakaway state, launched an attack to recapture the rebel state. The North started the war. Yeah, I think I said that as well. Gowon was advised by Britain to release Awo and Anthony Enahoro. They were both given positions under Gowon's administration, hence to neutralize the Yoruba. It's even interesting because both of them, Enahoro and Awolowo, even when they were, I think they were asked about, how do you feel about starvation being used as a weapon and killing children and all this stuff? They're like, look, it's a legitimate form of warfare. So by that point, they were completely sold by the idea, of that, because Gowon was their, I suppose, they were benefactors, Ogunigwe, kaboom, absolutely. We are going home, period, by fire, by thunder, right? Right after I was released, he went straight to Lagos to still in his prison uniform to meet Gowon and Murtala. Gowon appointed Enahoro as Minister of Information, and Awolowo was Prime Minister / Minister of Finance, credit to British brain, not Gowon. Absolutely. You can't credit Gowon for anything, really. He was a puppet, They claim 3 million died. That's not true. 6,000, 6 million. Huh? 3 million died. 6 million Igbos died. Look, I didn't want to get even to the war. I just wanted to focus on the run up to the war. What can only be classified as a genocide that led up to the war. The war itself is too and I don't think it's necessary. I think I do think we need to really put this down on TV. Like the documentaries that exist on the Biafran war are not enough for us to be like, we have a firm understanding of what happened cradle to grave. You look at things like The World at War. Netflix even released a new series about World War II with John Boyega. I mean, they chronicle these wars like they are, every week there's a new documentary. Whereas with Nigeria, I mean, I've seen one decent documentary, again, that was made in the 90s, early 90s. And I watched it when it first came out with my father. And I've seen a couple little ones here and there on YouTube, but we don't document this thing. Again, we have to get away from these Nollywood movies of everybody's getting married, everybody's, we have to move away. The rich man becomes a poor man becomes a rich man, marries a rich girl. We have to move away from it. We have to start looking at things in a, you want to compete with the world, then do things like the rest of the world does. Show your culture. Try and understand it, 28 was gone down. Classic divide and conquer, absolutely. Nigeria never stood a chance. Nigeria was a stillbirth, absolutely. Talk the thing, brother. Yes, my sister, thank you. In my opinion, they keep Nigeria together to steal from it. That's not your opinion, that's just a fact. That's not a novel thing, my sister. That is the fact of the matter. We are only there so that they can benefit. And even when they are done with taking the resources, they'll use our personnel. Wasn't it just during COVID, all of a sudden, let's bring Nigerian nurses. Let's bring Nigerian doctors. People that the Nigerian government has, or the Nigeria has trained, are leaving. So now when you go to a hospital in Nigeria, it's kaput. Then these people are going to tell you that they're giving you money in aid. Maybe not Nigeria, but they say, well, we're giving them this in aid. Like it's compensation for the loss of human beings, for the loss of resources. Dangote, you see what's happening with his refinery. See how they treat, what's his name? Airpeace. What's his name again, guys? Yeah, Airpeace. What's his name? What's his name again? Anyway, Airpeace. See how they dealt with them when they moved to Gatwick Airport. Then these people will come and tell you. Look, when it comes to British, European, whatever you want to call them, all they do is renege, or rather contradict themselves on every act of humanity that they purport to push. They just contradict themselves. Nollywood lacks imagination and needs to tell real African stories like Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, so we know what's up. Nollywood is not, you see, I have a problem with the word Nollywood in the first place. What that says to me is that we lack imagination and that we're not even good to create something that we have to copy. That it's not enough for us to create our own. We have to be a version of someone else's own, and a bad version at that. Please, I look. There are a lot of people who are working. Alan Onyema, thank you, my sister. Alan Onyema. There are a lot of people who are working hard to try and improve film industry in Nigeria, but I know the problems that they're having, and unfortunately, we're in this autopilot way of thinking. As African people in general, we are so carried. When have you taken loud before? You smoke loud, or one of these like really bad drugs, Molly or something like that. I've never tried it, by the way. But you take Molly and all these things, your mind, you're flying. That's where we are as Africans. We're flying. We're like on Molly. Fly anything that comes from outside. No, we have problems. We have, but you have to really, really, really and this concept of re-Africanizing, Kamal Kambon's concept. You have to re-Africanize. Every human being has to re-Africanize. If you don't re-Africanize, you won't even realize what you're doing to yourself and to your children. Correction taken. No problem, my brother. The talent is there, but it's being frustrated. My sister, listen, I've shot like 3 films in Nigeria. Two films in Nigeria, and then like a few documentaries. Let me tell you something. The talent is definitely there. The problem is, you see, austerity. You know the word austerity? When people are lacking, when you're lacking, this stomach, you need to eat now. You come and tell you, come and do this thing. Nobody cares. That's why everybody wants to be Big Brother. Bibi Naija. They want to do all this. Somebody will say we broke the record for cooking for 68 hours. Okay, let's go and do 70 hours. You know, that's how you go and tell somebody. You go and call somebody to your house to come and make to fix your air conditioner. They will do it halfway. Collect your money. You call them again the following week. You call somebody to do steps. They will do one step that is straight, another step that is slanted, another step that's slanted the other way. You see, we don't have this sense of excellence anymore. Go travel, people. Please, go. You watch my documentary, Egypt, right? The pyramids of Giza it's built so precisely that you could slip paper through. Like, these are African people that did this thing. African people that did this thing. These are not the are these, you mean tell me the same Africans that are walking around Nigeria, walking around Ghana, they're walking around? No. Their mind has been taken over. It's walking dead. It's zombies that are walking. We have to revive them somehow. Look how they're frustrating Dangote. Thank you. This is a man, look, however you want to look at the Dangote situation, and I've been critical of it because I'm like, okay, federal government is, but the man is solving a problem. But it's not just him. Again, Alain Onyema, Nigerian government is frustrating him. It's not just Britain. Nigerian government is frustrating him. I know this new Minister of Aviation is trying, at least on the outwardly trying. But, they did the same thing with Innoson and Nord vehicles. This is something where common sense basis, you should go and say, all the government vehicles, let's just go and use Innoson vehicles. Let's use Nord vehicles. Maybe not Nord, because Nord is not, I think Nord is, they assemble it, but it's parts from outside. Whereas Innoson is, they won't allow it. They rather go and buy Land Cruiser, Range Rover. I was in Nigeria for Eid, during Eid in June. And I was on Bodilon. Those of you know Ikoyi, Bodilon. Tinubu was coming home for Salah for the day. I saw a 30-car convoy. I saw motorcycles and motorcyclists doing backflips. You understand what I'm saying? Doing backflips so that Tinubu can come. And no car was Nigerian. Not one of the 30 cars. We have problems, my sister. We have too many problems. It's not only Dangote, but Dangote is there generally trying to solve a problem. In the restoration of self-belief in your own cultures, you will find the values and the strengths that will take you into the future. He say, no people will respect us as Africans or Black people until we elevate our culture to a level that it can compete with the rest of the world. Absolutely. Well said. Contractors frustrate you here in the West too. No, I know, but contractors, look, in England, they are frustrated. Everybody's frustrated, but there's a sense of, okay, this thing has to be done properly. There's a standard. You're trying to tell me, how many times you go to a mechanic in Nigeria, they fix the car the way it's supposed to be fixed? My dear, I hear you, but our own is another level. But anyway, my people, it's been real. Let me go. We're going to be back tomorrow. Festus, you're going to be live. Lizzie, are you joining us tomorrow? Are you going live? I don't know. And I think Son of Knock, but I think Festus is going to be our main guest tomorrow. We're going to be talking about the state of the nation. So you guys tune in. It's gonna be about the same time tomorrow. Let me go and get some sleep now. My people, I really appreciate you joining. Thank you for joining me on this series. Please, please, please hit the like button. If you've not subscribed, subscribe. And please, 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 if you found this thing interesting in any way, I beg, share it. Thank you so much, my people. God bless you. And have a good night. We'll see each other again tomorrow. So, Lizzie, I'm tired of this thing, Lizzie. Stop all this shyness. No, Lizzie, I'm not joking. Lizzie, I'm not joking. In fact, Lizzie, DM me on, what did you DM me? DM me on Instagram. Please, just DM me. I beg. AEA Films. Just DM me. Be cool. Thank you. All right, my people. Festus, see you tomorrow. Kwame, Galactic Soul, Gallant Vibes. Oh, Gallant Vibes. I didn't read this. We are going home period by 5. Okay, I did read that. Freeman. Who again did I miss out? Jimmy. Where are we? Okay. RT 2011. All right, my people. Thank you. God bless you. Have a